Yes.
Thanks, Bob.
To Newcote Road and then go to the valley.
That's Jen C. Here's Jen now.
Traffic.
I don't know where I put people. I just kind of, it's random. There are no assigned seats. Jen, Vanessa Pascal. You're
Like the
next.
line of cars. I guess size for
I'm done. Wait for the chair to let us know. So Chair, just let us know so we can start the recording and live stream, right? Excuse me, Todd, let us know because we have to start the recording and the live stream. So you let us know when you're ready.
Let's go.
Okay. All right, whenever you're.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. April 2nd, our committee meeting number 15. Calling everything to order. Welcome to another night of one presentation and then some discussion. We do have a quorum, so let's review and approve the agenda. Has everybody seen the agenda? I think we're all looking at it. So I just need a motion to approve that.
No moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And then secondly, review and approve the minutes, which are now posted. They are the video minutes from the last meeting. I need a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. All right, Chris Ito, we're going to start with you to do the multimodal test presentation and fill us in on what we need to know there.
Okay. Stop my camera.
If you want.
Sure, because I'm here in
Yep.
real life. Share.
So this is Chris Eastoff from our Office of Transportation. I know we've been having a lot of presentations, but I thought it was important for him to be here tonight because we will be doing some discussion regarding if you would like to include a multimodal test to the AFO testing requirements. That's something we talked about earlier. So I thought it was important to bring him in now that we're into the discussions of making motions to have a discussion of what a multimodal test would look like. So as you have your deliberations, you would have a good background for this information. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris. So thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, Linda. So yes, I was part of the group that came by with this group, if you remember, a few months ago with DPW and transportation, and we kind of gave a bit more background and intro into this transportation and roads test and APFO history and background. So, you know, we've got quite a bit more advanced concepts and proposals now to share with this group to see if this group supports something similar to this. And, you know, this is a bit more background up here as a reminder. But there's updates to the APFO roads test, specifically the roads portion of APFO, is required by Council Resolution 17-2022. This was the county's complete streets policy resolution, which basically outlined all of our policies for transportation and specifically for our streets in Howard County. And it required a update to the APFO regulations for transportation, specifically for complete streets and multimodal aspects, meaning, you know, the current APFO test is for motor vehicle capacity only. That's the only thing that it looks at. And this resolution required it to add some kind of multimodal, you know, non-automotive test and requirements through APFO. So there was a group that preceded this one called the Transportation Regulations Advisory Group that worked in 2024 and came up with a set of recommendations on you know, what needs to be updated for all the county's regulations, including APFO, including other county regulations such as the subdivision regulations to comply with Council Resolution 17-2022 and really implement complete streets in all of our county guidelines that are out there, regulations. So that kind of, you know, is advancing obviously through the work of your group, which I know you're working on other things other than transportation, but that's one element of the APFO update that you're working on. So using those recommendations from the LUTRAC group, the Land Use and Transportation group, and refining them a little bit more with staff work, we've come up with a couple of proposed tests and mitigations that could be APFO mitigations for transportation I'd like to share with you tonight. One is a pedestrian crossing, pedestrian safety crossing at intersections test and mitigation, and the other one is a transit or bus stop mitigation. And we want to keep in mind that really important that these guidelines support the county complete streets goals and requirements, that they're fair and proportional. We want to make sure that smaller developments and larger developments kind of do their fair and reasonable proportioned mitigations, so that larger developments can have they're going to have a larger impact on traffic and transportation, therefore they would have a larger mitigation than a smaller development. And we want to make sure that this is simple to understand and implement for committees, for county councils, for developers. So we really tried to come up with something that wasn't a whole bunch of new tests and a whole bunch of new hard to understand requirements on developers, but there was more based on what they're already doing, but adding this pedestrian and bus stop layer on top of that, and using a lot of their existing work and background and studies that developers are already doing as part of their traffic studies that they've been doing for years. So the first test is this pedestrian crossing test. The guidelines are up on the screen there, and I'll give a bit more detail about just the gist of this, and then I have an example to show how this would work as well. So this is basically taking the same intersections that developers currently study as part of APFO for their roads capacity tests, but looking at those same intersections defined by the same criteria. We wouldn't change any of that. Developers already know how to do that. They're already doing it in all their traffic studies. And they also have to look at those same intersections to see if they have the adequate pedestrian crossing facilities in place. If not, they may have to make a mitigation to improve those intersections. What I mean by those pedestrian facilities are the marked crosswalk on the ground, the signage, the curb ramps, ADA curb ramps at the corners, and then if it's a signalized intersection, which it almost always is, the pedestrian signal where the pedestrian can press the button, get the pedestrian green light to cross and cross safely. The majority of our intersections in Howard County on county roads do not have all those facilities at all crossings of the intersection. Assuming it's a four-way intersection, which most are, most intersections are not complete in that manner. There might be a few that are in the county, but the majority are not. So there's plenty of mitigations to go around for developers. There's plenty of work that needs to be done in this area. The other good thing about this is these improvements would almost just about always be within the county right of way. So we're not getting into situations where there's a third party private property owner involved that may or may not want this improvement on that property. These are at intersections of county roads and county roads. So the county owns the right of way for these kind of improvements. You can see on the tables here, we've devised this. This is a proposal. This could change, but this is something that staff has done a little bit of research on and we think makes sense to have small, medium, and large developments. And that's based on the number of peak hour trips that they generate. Again, this is a term and a number that the developers are already looking at, already developing as part of their traffic studies for the number of peak hour trips that they generate. And it works for both residential communities and for commercial communities or developments as well. So they'd be small, medium, or large based on those numbers. And that determines the cap or the ceiling on for the dollar amount of the improvement that they would be required to make under this test. So it's either $20,000, $60,000, or $100,000 based on the size of their development. Again, this is a proposal. These numbers could change for a variety of reasons, but we wanted to give a sense of scale here that we're talking about, not huge amounts of money for these developers, but not insignificant either. These are useful improvements that the county would like to have made, and we are making some of these improvements. We just can't possibly do them all at once, and it's helpful to have the developers support as they're going through. So the 60K is somewhat significant, the medium-sized development there, because that is the approximate cost of one crossing, one leg of one intersection to provide those amenities that I talked about before, the crosswalk, the curb ramps, the signs, and the pedestrian crossing facility usually comes out at about 60K for one leg. So here's an example of what this would look like. So this is a real development that came through the county's process fairly recently. It's Patuxent Commons. It's at the intersection of Cedar Lane and Freetown Road. So the developer already did a traffic study for this development. It already got approved. It's already going under construction. But if this APFO mitigation was in place when they came through, they would have done the same traffic study that they did for APFO, and it identified, a little hard to see, but there's 5 intersections there within the specified boundary of, that's already specified in APFO of this site. So they would look at those, that would be their universe to look at for pedestrian crossing improvements. We would recommend they start looking at the closest one to their development, which is intersection number 1 in this case, at the intersection of Cedar Lane and Freetown. And they would start to look at potential mitigations. So the charts that I pulled here were right from their traffic study. The developer already figured out what their predicted peak hour trips generated will be. It's 22 in the AM peak and 30 in the PM peak. So the 30 is the bigger one. So that puts them in the medium scale development here. So they could be on the hook for a mitigation up to $60,000.
Yeah, please.
Can I ask you-
Sure.
That community is a moderate housing community, isn't it? Isn't the Freetown, Patuxent Commons,
I
isn't
think
it?
it's mixed, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so this, my question is, so you're saying it doesn't matter whether it's income or whatever, it's the same regardless, the same.
At
It's
this
just
point,
based
the
on the-
proposal is based on the number of trips they generate. Yep.
Thanks.
So if you go to look at the first intersection right next to their site is in the grassy northeast quadrant of this intersection here of Cedar and Freetown. And there is one pedestrian crossing you can see that's in place currently. You can see that in the aerial there on that south leg. The other 3 crossings are all missing. So, the markers there indicate the missing crossings, the missing pedestrian signals, missing curb ramps. So again, it's pretty, you only need to go to the very first intersection. You've already got plenty of mitigation to do here, which is, to do all this would actually exceed that cap. This would be approximately $180,000 worth of improvements to do all 3. If they're on the hook for $60,000, they would be on the hook for one of these crossings. Probably would make the most sense to do the one across Freetown since that's
Excuse
closest
me,
to that development.
So at $60,000 per crossing, what exactly does that entail? Do you have an itemized breakdown?
Yeah, that's the chart that I shared here, and it's on the screen here. So it's the crosswalk marking, curb ramps,
The
and,
fonts are really small, it's very hard to read from here.
okay,
It's also on our webpage. So the presentation was sent out and it's also on our website too as well.
so it's the bottom chart
Here,
here,
the bottom
3
box.
items.
You want to stay on the screen?
Just one more question. The amount,
I mean,
It's
it's
for
it's
the-
not broken down in a way where I can understand, right? So what is a ramp exactly, that costs 15K for a ramp? Just help me understand the figure, right? Because it sounds very high.
So it's
do-
15K for 2 ramps, but these are, to get from the road level to a sidewalk level, you have the pedestrian ADA sloping ramp. So they're at every corner basically
I
of
know
every
what
intersection. of
they
the
are, I
crossing,
think
so.
Howard County, I've seen them, but I'm struggling with the number, 15K each.
Yeah, it's
Pretty cheap.
it's concrete work. It's a small construction project to go and build this small concrete ramp on a corner. So costs approximately $7.5 thousand to do a concrete ramp, so 15,000 for 2.
So excuse me, Chris, does it also include the engineering costs and all? Is that baked into that
Yeah.
piece? I think it's all the
Yeah,
costs
install.
to nuts. Yeah, and then bringing the equipment out to do all of that and everything as well.
Yeah, these are the numbers I got from DPW that do this kind of work on a regular basis.
Roads are expensive.
Mhm.
You touch
Yeah,
more than you think.
is the amount assessed is for the project or per intersection? Because there's 5 intersections there. Would you be assessed that amount for each?
Yeah, so in this case, in this example, they've gone to the first intersection and they found 3 crossings that are needed. Their cap is 60K, so they only have enough within their cap to fix 1 intersection. So they'd be fixing 1 intersection, one crossing here.
Project.
Yep.
The whole project would be 180K.
No.
Nope.
Just
No.
that intersection.
Just that.
No, the cap.
The cap is,
Capped at 60.
the cap is per project.
Right,
Per
so-
development.
That's
What
what the
he's-
developers on the hook for.
right, what he's saying is like, if someone were to come in and do this entire project would be the 180,000. But this development, kind of indexed to the size and the scope, the developer would only have to pay $60,000 proportionate to the project. So what he's saying is that we would collect that $60,000 and it would go to, let's pick a project. And then that would be that one crosswalk that it would go toward.
What do you do with the extra money?
Well, there wouldn't be any because we're saying that would cost $60,000.
Okay, he was saying it was 35,000 for, if you go back a page, it says it's 35,000. Oh, those are separate costs, not in, so you have to add the curb to the marking to the 30.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
cost to improve one leg of the intersection is 60K.
I thought maybe that was,
So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the logical cap to have for a medium development, because they
Right.
would then be, within that cap, they can improve one leg of one intersection.
I do a quick question. So last AFOs for, since 92, we're told the road test, the intersection test, typically is something that's assessed to a developer. They can't get out of it. They must do it. They must mitigate it. But we've always been told that it either follows the design guide or the complete streets guide to more modern times. Are you saying that these weren't automatically being done in the road tests that are currently in?
The current road test has no test or mitigation for pedestrian crossing whatsoever. It's,
And I get the difference between tests, but mitigation, if you're doing a intersection, they aren't doing it to the state code or.
No.
complete streets guide.
no,
They're just doing-
they only have to mitigate for motor vehicle capacity, so they have to add a lane or do something to the roadway to make it work under their motor vehicle capacity constraints, but there is no test or mitigation at all currently in APO for pedestrian improvements.
That's a little different than it was characterized in quite a few hearings, I think. But let me talk briefly to the caps. This is something that was presented by Montgomery County when they came by and said there's a cap on road mitigation. And when I asked why a cap, they go, developers didn't want to spend any. Okay, that's some interesting logic. But this goes up in scale. You can see 50 plus. What happens when you have 200 plus movements in the area? We're capped at your highest level. There's no scalability for very large projects.
I mean, it's possible we could look at how many developments are likely to be at that kind of scale, and there could be another super large, extra large category for higher amounts. Seems like there was a pretty rare, but this was a fairly large development here that just still fell in the medium level. But yeah, there could be a higher level.
And these are just trips, not units, right?
Understood, it's a different
Yeah.
time. Granted, I wear the school hat all the time, but we're very concerned about crosswalks as well. And we want to make sure we're not coming short. And also, is there an inflation index on this?
We have not put that in there now, but that would make sense. Obviously, these are today's costs and today's estimates, and that could look differently, so it would make sense to index these, yeah.
How were these amounts derived? Is my first question. And my second question is, I just want to confirm that what I'm hearing is they pay a fee. They don't actually do the mitigation.
It could be either way. I mean, unless the county's first choice is for them to do the mitigation and not burden the county with the work. But if for some reason it makes more sense for them to pay the county to do the work or to pay into a capital budget, which we do have capital budget areas for this kind of crosswalk work that are general across the county, that could be an option as well.
So how were these the numbers that were derived to be suggested?
So the 60K is the main one because that's based on the cost of one crossing. That's our current cost estimate for one crossing is the 60K. And then the small and large ones are basically scaled on either side of that. So it's, these have not been precisely dictated at this point. It's just 60K is definitely a good number for the medium level because it covers one leg. And then there's a small or large either side of that. But
Is
They
there,
could change if there's a reason to change them.
is there anything within this model that requires that those mitigations actually happen and all legs are done? So when we're looking at Patuxent Commons, we see that one leg has already been done, that leaves three remaining. The developer pays the 60,000. Does anything have to happen with that 60,000? Is there a requirement within it to actually do the work and to finish the other two legs at a minimum?
I mean, the requirement would come with the update to the regulations to implement this. And then it would follow the same, like the road APFO test now, that follows a similar path. The developer is required to either make the development or pay the county the amount for the improvement.
And if I could jump in for the other three legs, so let's just say other developments come into that area, then you could essentially say that other developments would take care of the other legs as time occurs.
Yeah.
Other developments occur.
But
There's
there's
no,
no additional land there. Oh,
there's
well,
no additional rules.
Well, there could be redevelopment projects also count for that. I mean, when redevelopment comes in and trips are generated differently, essentially they could also be responsible for that. And then the county, to close the loop, you would think at some point in time, we would also put in capital to finish those crosswalks as needs are identified as well.
And is there a bid?
But at least you're getting something instead of
Is there
nothing.
a bidding system used to, award the work, or is the work done by, staff of the county?
So if the county's doing the work,
Yeah, is it done in-house or is it contracted
we
out?
typically, for this kind of work, would use in-house contractors. So we do use contractors, but they're already under contract on call with general requirements contracts to do this kind of work.
The county has a labor
Oh,
contract
no.
for engineering.
Yeah, there's an order of people speaking, so let's try not to jump out.
So, hey, Chris, glad that you're using this example because I'm familiar with this project. It's in the village of Hickory Ridge. I served on the Hickory Ridge Village Board for a number of years when the developers were pushing this through the planning and development process. So I've heard a number of specific presentations from the developers on this project. And by the way, it's a fantastic project. It's creating a home for adults with disabilities. It's just a remarkable project. It's very exciting. But when I heard from the developers, one of the things that my understanding of this project is the developers are responsible of building sidewalks along the perimeter of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And also, I thought they were already planning on doing at least one of those crosswalks for this project. So could you help me understand how your proposal for APFO works with any other existing county regulations that require the developer
Yeah.
to add this type of public infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's already in this county's regulations that already requires developers to do sidewalks and other similar infrastructure on their site. So any new roads that they're building, access road, internal roads have to have the correct features as per the design manual. I'm not sure, Brent, if that's what you were getting at, but if they're building new, they have to build all up to county standards, of the current complete street standards. For the frontage of their development, so usually a development fronts a existing road, so county roads, in this case, Freetown and Cedar Lane, the developer is already on the hook to put sidewalks on those roads if they do not already exist. Along their frontage, basically to the limit of where their frontage ends. So that could be two legs in this case. I think they are doing some of that. As you can see here, Freetown and Cedar, in this area, these two legs do not have sidewalks on this. So they're doing a lot of that already, current regulations. So this is building on that. So APFO is more about off-site improvements, just like the APFO roads test is off-site intersections that are not at the site itself. This is for off-site intersections. Although this one's very close to the site, but it's off-site. These are existing county roads that are adjacent to the site. So it's adding a requirement for them to make some improvements at an off-site intersection, which previously has not existed
Got it. Okay, thank you.
for pedestrians, for non-motorized travelers.
Okay.
My question was, so if it's deemed a small peak hour trip, it's the same intersection, yeah, just the developer's on the hook for 20K instead of 60.
Yeah.
And the county picks up the rest of the bill.
So Probably, so that, the small ones are likely to be a fee in lieu type situation where they paid that fee to the county, the 20K, and the county uses that to make an improvement at a nearby intersection, obviously needing some of the funds. There are possibilities where they could be, for example, improving the ramps or improving the crosswalk markings, which, have a smaller dollar cost.
Sure.
So there are mitigations they could make at an intersection that are not the full 60K. So
Right,
that's a
but it's
possibility
still
as
the
well.
same intersection. It's gonna cost what it costs. Besides, it doesn't matter. It's still has to cross the street and be so wide.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying some of the intersection could have the pedestrian crossing already, but the ramps were out of compliance. They weren't
Sure. No, I
ADA,
get
so they
that.
could make those ADA, and that would be a useful improvement within the 20K.
Got you.
So I see a connection. My question is more towards the committee and what they discussed. Is there's a state requirement that when a school does or is proposing an addition of 100 students or more, we have to do a pedestrian safety plan, which kind of ties into kind of this. And specifically, the example you're giving here is right down the street from Atherton High School. So it's within the walk zone. Did the committee discuss any connection between those types of things, complete streets and the walk zones for the schools? Or is this specifically looking at the intersections and the traffic?
Yeah, this would be separate from that, because obviously this is not the school that's being developed, so they're not required to do that test that you mentioned. There could be, or the study that you mentioned, there could be a school nearby that's doing an expansion with a study. But does that actually require mitigations to be made, like construction improvements to be made, or is it just to be studied? Just to like kind of identify potential improvements, I guess, is the way I understood that. school
The
study.
initial is for the study to identify improvements, but the state can require mitigation, yes, which then gets into mitigation potentially off school system property, on county property and right of ways and things like that.
Yeah, so I assume if that study looked at this particular intersection, it would recommend these 3 legs be improved. And in this case, the developer would be improving one of them.
Yeah, Lisa.
I have a quick data question. Where you have on the chart, the dollar cap for the complete street improvements. And then you mentioned having those 2 requests with the ADA bus stop and the pedestrian crossing issue. Are there?
I haven't got to the bus stop one yet, by the way. There is another
Okay,
mitigation to
so
come.
my question is on that cap, where you're labeling it the complete streets improvement cap. What all is in that cap? Is it just this pedestrian
Yes.
crossing part?
Yes, the bus stop test is separate than this
Okay,
cap.
so that's
And
gonna,
that's gonna,
okay,
still got a couple slides to show on that,
okay, thanks. Thanks.
which I'll move on to whenever I can. Maybe I'll move on now and then when we come again for questions.
One last one, and this is pretty important. Last day, if we were talking about offsetting sidewalks. While that literally got voted down, somebody was killed in my neighborhood at the exact time. But there's doing things along the frontage of a property. Are there contingencies in here where, okay, the frontage is already handled, it's a phased project, it's multiple owners, whatever. Can that be offsite? And is that offsite capability able to be converted for things like bike lanes, multimodal, things of that nature, or distance-based, whereas you get further away, it's less advantageous to do it offsite? Because you can easily collect all the money and go Clarksville or Sykesville to build a sidewalk across the farm cheaper than downtown Columbia.
Yeah, so this is not doing that. I mean, there are some, in the current regulations, there is some allowance to go a little bit further than the frontage, 200 feet on either side of the frontage to require them to build sidewalks beyond their frontage. So that does exist already a little bit. But we are trying to avoid a very complicated sidewalk connection off-site based system because it runs into a lot of problems. Usually the problem that it runs into is right of way. So where sidewalks don't currently exist, it's usually because right of way to build that sidewalk does not currently exist, meaning it's not the county's property, it's not the developer's property, it's some third party that, their neighbor's property that is required to build that sidewalk. So it's very difficult to ask the developer to go and, ask or require, they can't require their neighbor to play along and put the sidewalk on their property, just like the county struggles with that too. if the property owner is not amenable. So we were trying to avoid that situation where these sidewalks just don't get built off-site because the right of way is private. This avoids that by focusing on the intersections where the county is going to have the right of way, and there's plenty of mitigation to go around. Again, this is just one intersection of the 5, by the way, that were for this particular development. We didn't even need to go to intersection. There were 3 mitigations here needed. There's more at every one of these intersections. So there's kind of plenty of mitigation required and needed without having to go and deal with the right of way issue that sidewalks usually bring.
And what I'm fishing for is more of a definitive rule. That's good practice.
I'll jump in. Go ahead. You go first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is the expectation that since a lot of these projects, particularly this project in particular, almost certainly is going to have a couple of crews come by to do concrete work and everything else for foundations and such, is the expectation that the developer would use their crews that they're using for the project to do some of this work, or would it be a separate project? And how would the funding cap work in that case? Because some of the cost in setting up a standalone capital project is going to be in the PM overhead of a small project, and you don't have to pay the concrete crew to bring their equipment to the site if it's already at the site. And so, how does that cost expected to work?
So yeah, I think there's some efficiencies that could be had for the developer if they use their own resources that are already at the adjacent site to do the work, or to at least do some of the work. There might even be a little bit of cost savings there for them, and they might even come in under the cap. So if they can make a one-leg improvement with the required amenities, and they're able to do the work for 50,000 instead of 60,000, then everybody's happy, the improvement is made, and they've done it in an efficient manner.
And that's the calculus all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing with respect to rights of way, if you're doing a subdivision in the county and there's not sufficient right of way on the road that you're developing, that you're fronting, the county would usually require you to give a widened right of way off the front of your property along the road. That's number one. Number two, a good example on sidewalks, you mentioned sidewalks, is that there are many cases where there's a sidewalk requirement and you end up paying fee in lieu because there's no connecting sidewalk on either side of your project. So even though you're providing the right of way to add a future sidewalk, you're not actually putting in the sidewalk, you're paying a fee to the county in lieu of putting it in because there's no right of way on either side of you. So they can use that money to expand the sidewalk network, and it may be miles and miles away from your project. But that money goes into basically a sidewalk fund that then would be added, the sidewalks would be added somewhere else in the county, or other improvements like this.
Yeah, the county has those situations all the time where they have to decide and work with the developer whether it's going to be a fee in lieu for a sidewalk or have them put the sidewalk in. I mean, I'd say we are trying to lean more towards more recently putting the sidewalk in, especially if there's possibility of future developments that will link those sidewalk segments together. We are trying to build out piece by piece, but it can be a long time to do that. And sometimes it is more efficient to take the fee in lieu. Yeah.
Stop, start.
Yeah.
One question though on this. It's roughly $1,000 a unit in this example. So what are they spending now before this on road improvements? What's the delta?
So oftentimes they spend zero now because their tests that they currently do for road capacity is, they essentially do a pass-fail test. Is the impact of their development, their trips, going to take these intersections over a certain threshold? So, oftentimes it does not take them over the certain threshold, and they don't have to make any mitigations. So, and I don't know the exact numbers, but from what I hear, most times currently it's zero that they're paying for a road test
And
currently.
in this example?
This example, it was zero. They did not have to mitigate
They
these
didn't have any.
intersections for roadway capacity.
Yes, yeah.
I was just curious for this project, because it doesn't connect on, I think, Cedar Lane, the sidewalk won't connect to an existing sidewalk.
They will though, because they're building it, but
All the way, because there's some private.
to the north of Freetown, they are putting it in. I know currently it shows currently it shows no sidewalk here, but they are building those two sidewalk legs on that north and east leg. They,
Brown Road.
that is coming. That
Owen
one's
Brown.
to Owen Brown. Yeah, they're going all the way to Owen Brown.
Okay, and what you're saying is that with the existing regulations, they are not under any obligation to make ADA compliant sidewalk entries, crosswalks, anything, they just.
Not for the intersection. So yeah, they're just required to do
The
that. So
intersection stays as it.
frontage work, their frontage work. I mean, Jeremy said he thinks he might have heard they were making an intersection improvement. I have not heard that, and that would be a little bit unusual, but it's possible, especially because this is a bit of a different kind of project, but typically, no, they're not required to do intersection. It's just their frontage sidewalk.
Thank
you. Yes.
Signs.
The next one should be
I know.
shorter. So I'll just mention, I have two other examples here. I'm not going to go through them because they're very similar, but they're in your deck if you want to look at how this works for a commercial property. And how it works for a small residential property. Those are examples 2 and 3 in there. And then the transit test. So this is in addition to everything we just talked about, developers would also be required to look at an area, a quarter-mile radius from their developments at the existing RTA, which is our local bus service, the existing RTA bus stops. Some developments may not have any. There is no RTA bus service in the western part of the county, and there is also some gaps in the other parts of the county. But if they have a bus stop within a quarter mile of their developments, which is a reasonable nexus, right? A quarter mile is a reasonable assumption that somebody that lived in that development maybe want to use that bus stop. It's a short walk. They would look at that existing bus stop to see if it's ADA compliant. Again, by ADA compliant, we mean, is there a place to stand and wait for the bus that is a hard surface, usually concrete or asphalt, and then get onto the bus in an ADA fashion. If you're in a wheelchair, is it concrete or asphalt to be able to board the bus? And then we're also making it so they would have to provide an ADA connection to the nearest intersection, meaning a sidewalk to the nearest intersection. So that is all outlined here with a little bit more detail. And then I put some data in the bottom here just for context. We currently have 458 of these bus stops in Howard County. 233, so very close to 50% are currently ADA, what we consider ADA accessible. They have those features I just mentioned. So we're about 50-50 in the county right now. And our Office of Transportation is working on improving the rest of them. We do want to get, they really should all be accessible. But it's a long process. It's a lot of work. And again, it would be helpful if developers were doing a small piece of this as they go along with their projects. We also have 71 of those 458 that actually have shelters on them. Now, shelters are not required to be, it's not an ADA requirement. It's nice to have a shelter, especially if it's a higher volume stop where more people catch the bus, and they're obviously protected from the elements, and you've usually got a bench and a place to sit. But it's not required, and honestly, it's not a goal for us to have every one of our bus stops in Howard County, all 458 with a shelter. That would be a lot. That's a huge undertaking. So we kind of try to put them at the higher volume, higher ridership stops. As you can see, we've got, 20% or so that have shelters currently. So again, I put an example of what that might look like. This is a real development over here on Martin Road. Shown in green here, this is the Chesapeake Conference Center. And the nearest bus stop is over here near the intersection of Martin Road and Seneca. Yep, Seneca. So that's shown with this white pin down here. It's within a quarter mile of their site. So when you look at that, what that looks like currently on Street View here, it's a little dark, but you can see the bus stop right here. This is not one of our proudest bus stops in Howard County. Imagine standing there in the shadows, waiting for the bus.
Oh my goodness.
It's like a speed trap where the
Yeah.
thing's hidden behind.
Yeah, so, this is quite common. Like I said, 50% of our bus stops in Howard County are not ADA accessible, meaning a lot of them unfortunately look something like this. And we're trying to get to these to make these basic improvements. So in this case, that would be to build a small concrete pad. It's not a large site. It's small concrete area for someone to stand on while they're waiting for the bus, or be in a wheelchair while they're waiting for the bus. A lot of bus riders do have disabilities. You know, a lot of times that's why they don't drive. That's why they might be riding the bus. And then here you can see we're showing the pedestrian connection, ADA connection to the nearest intersection, which is Martin and Seneca. So this is, I think it was about 100 feet in this case to build this connection.
How do you deal with easements there?
So yes, this could be a situation where right-of-way exists to do this connection, or it might not be. And we're suggesting that if the developer, if it is a private property situation, they don't have right-of-way and they're not able to get right-of-way, then they would not need to make that connection. We really can't force that. There's no way to force that third-party owner. Obviously, the county has some right-of-way to put the bus stop, so usually they're going to be a little bit of space to put at least the pad in, but that will be on a case-by-case basis. The cost of these improvements, we've been looking at a few. It's kind of, you know, in this case, I think we came up with a cost estimate of $15,750 to make these improvements. So, you know, we're kind of looking in that $10,000 to $20,000 range to make the improvement for the bus stop pad and potentially a connection to the nearest intersection. This would be in addition to the previous test that we looked at for pedestrian crossings at intersections.
So tying those two together, they may end up doing it anyways, but the image you were just on, there are no crosses at that intersection. So is there any requirement that if they're gonna have to do that bus stop, that if they're required to, their intersection has to be at this one?
We didn't make that a requirement at this time, but it could be. So, and I didn't run the crossing test for this development, but you know, that you could certainly mold those together and have them do this crossing here will be the one that has a logical connection, right, across Seneca, if that was the crossing improvement through the pedestrian crossing test. I mean, this particular intersection, the county is planning on doing some work also to make some crossing improvements. So this one would work quite well because we could be coming in at a similar time and making those crossing improvements. But yes, sometimes they could work well together, the pedestrian crossing mitigation and the bus stop mitigation. Sometimes they might not. The bus stop might be in a different location that's not near one of their test intersections.
Is there also a lump sum for this one instead of just the actual mitigation?
Like a fee and lieu situation.
Like you did for the other.
We did not set that up, but that's a possibility. And I guess that, well, in that case, that could be used at another bus stop that's.
I was just actually thinking about it I don't know if they would have the folks to do this kind of, supposedly, I don't know, developers and contractors.
Yeah, I mean, concrete work is usually right within their wheelhouse, right? They do a lot of that kind of work. It's pretty basic concrete work.
So what's the test here and what's the remedy?
Is there a bus stop within a quarter mile? That's the test.
An existing bus stop.
Existing bus stop. Yeah, they're not building any new bus stops because that doesn't work with our existing service, right? Like we've got our routes established.
Okay.
So is there an existing bus stop within a quarter mile? Is it ADA compatible currently? About 50% of them are, 50% of them aren't. So if there is a bus stop currently there and it's not ADA compatible, they're on the hook to make the fix.
But so in that case, that stop right there, no matter what you do to make the bus stop ADA compatible, you can't get there in an ADA compatible way.
Well, that's
Good with this.
There you go.
what he
You
had
can,
said.
yeah, you can.
Well,
So-
he
By
is-
moving it.
There's no walks or anything.
No,
That's
so,
This is,
no, oh, sort of.
Yeah.
So there's a sidewalk across the street, immediately across the street from that bus stop.
Mhm.
There are 3 other sidewalks, that's Shaker and Martin. There's a sidewalk on the southernmost portion of Shaker, and then on the southwestern part of Martin, there's a sidewalk that goes down towards the park that's there.
yeah.
So what's actually missing is you can get to the bus stop, just can't.
Once you're
really-
there, yeah. It looks like Mayberry.
Why are the curb and gutter ADA ramps so much less expensive on this second example compared to a street crossing? Because this looks like, where was it? It's in here, the cost is approximately, curb and gutter of $1,050 for 50 linear feet
Yeah, so that,
compared to,
so that curb and gutter is not calculated for the other example. That's running curb and gutter along a roadway in a linear fashion.
Mhm.
So that wasn't calculated or needed for the intersection improvement. It's a different kind of improvement. These are the curb ramps. Now, these curb ramps are going to be similar, but not the same on this intersection example, the 15K for 2 curb ramps. That is somewhat similar to the curb ramp here, this intersection ramp. Not quite the same, but somewhat similar. This did come from the transit group, this estimate, and the other estimate came from DPW that does work on the intersections. So I'll have to look into like the discrepancy between the cost estimates, but I think this is more of a in-house materials only cost estimate, where the other one was a contractor doing it soup to nuts.
and so in the first example at Patuxent Commons, the assumption would be that they would pay a fee of $60,000 that would cover one leg of improvements. But we would require them to do the work in the second
No,
example.
on
for
the
ADA.
first example, we'd rather them do the work.
Yeah, he said that he would rather the developer did the work than give the money to the county. And that's their preference,
But they can.
but they can't.
Can make the developer do the work. But we prefer the developer does the work, especially if they already have the materials already out there to do so.
So is there any reason why we would offer a fee in lieu instead of requiring the work?
Well, in the first example, the most likely reason to have a fee in lieu is if it's a small development and they're only on the hook for 20,000. What can you do for 20,000 is the question. Like, it doesn't fulfill all the requirements of one leg of an intersection. So it's not even enough to do one leg. So we may just take the 20K and collect 3 20Ks and do a leg in 3 different developments. But if there was an improvement that did make sense at that intersection for 20K, like not the full improvement, but doing ramp improvements or parking improvements that could be done within 20K, then they could do those. But if not, 20K doesn't get you far enough to make the whole improvement. So we would rather take the 20K.
Can I ask you a question? Okay, so I have 2 questions, actually, sorry. So first of all, just to go back to your example, Freetown Road, where it needs all this stuff. Well, let's say you're in a situation where, because a lot of the land that's developable is like in the eastern part of the county, where maybe there is already a lot of this, like say, Elk Ridge and all that way. So what happens if you have a development, but you don't need any of that because it's already been done? You would still collect the money then and do it somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen very often, though. Like I
But
said,
if it does, say, blue sky it.
I've been thinking through how many intersections we have on county roads that have all 4 legs with all the apparatus, and it's, you could count them on one hand.
So,
Out of
but I'm just saying, if we I'm thinking because I assume you're telling us this because you're asking us to make motions and include these things in our recommendations.
Sounds good.
So, if
Is that a
you came across that situation, you're saying you would still collect the money, but just use it somewhere else because that intersection's, so there's no situation in which a builder would say, you don't have to give the money, you don't have to do improvements, even because where you're building, it's already done, because everybody else pays, you pay, even though where you're building, it's already done. Because we're gonna put that somewhere else.
I would suggest that if all the study intersections within their scope, which is these, are fully 100% pedestrian compliant,
Mhm,
that they did not have to mitigate or pay a fee.
mhm.
Because their contribution to the transportation network of pedestrians is covered.
Mhm.
Another part of the county is is somewhat irrelevant to their, to the.
Okay, so it would only be
generating.
where improvements are needed.
Yes,
Like,
Which-
in that odd.
which I believe is currently 100% of the developments. Because, Again, this, even if this one, even if the nearest intersection was compliant, the next one is not going to be, and the next one, the next, like, there's usually
Uh-huh,
3 or 4 or 5 intersections included in their study area.
uh-huh.
They're going to have needs. Now, maybe 50 years from now, if this is all successful and they're all getting built out, then it might get harder to find the needs, but then, success,
Good,
right?
right?
Success.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Well,
Standard will change.
Nothing should stay the same over 60 years.
Yes, we'll have hoverboard requirements or something at that point.
Oh, my goodness. Back to the future.
So, again, there's other examples in here you can look at on your own time. You have them in the slide deck. There's a few examples for the bus stop test as well. But that is what I wanted to present. That is the gist of the proposal. I think you mentioned this group, adopting or motioning to recommend something similar, then, I think that's a great idea. That's, but that's obviously this group's decision.
But that's what you're hoping
That's what I'm hoping.
by making the
This is what-
presentation.
This is in line with what the previous committee, the LUTRAC committee, came up with and, refined by county staff, and we've worked with DPZ on these improvements. And we believe they're logical, easy to implement, and really helpful to the county's complete streets goals.
You have it written down, I don't see it in here, but you have these exact proposals of regulations written down that we may mirror them if somebody wants to make a motion.
Got you one better. Number 56, number 63, number 88, and number 87 from our parking lot.
Okay, so we're already there.
What did you say? This? I want to write that down. What are those numbers?
56, 63, 88, and 87 all contribute to what Chris has shared.
Okay.
56, which one?
63, 88, and 87. Although if you're doing them in numerical order, it would be 87, 88. So 56, 63, 87, 88.
The overriding one is there is no transportation and no pedestrian test. So the first motion would be
To add it.
amend the roads test to account for pedestrian and transportation. Then these two motions would be next to that. And then I think it was Brett's, number 87, which would probably be the next motion after that. Because that's in line with Cocoa by Design and the design manual's recommendations for pedestrian improvements within the developer's scope of work.
The offsite, so 87 is road resurfacing sidewalk, traffic, implementing offsite mitigation penalty of 10%. That one is the one?
Yes.
These are all your motions.
Did you send us an updated parking lot? Or is it-
Just make a motion.
So what you just showed us in the committee work, is that going to anybody to actually be codified, or was that just recommendations to the county?
So,
Right, he's presenting to us, but a committee did that. Was the committee for you to then come to us? Or what was the point of that committee doing those recommendations?
so yes, the LUTRAG came up with recommendations, recognizing that there was going to be an APFO committee formed in the near future, which it was, and that the LUTRAG recommendations will be presented to the APFO committee, which they were a couple months ago. This is a bit more refined into an actual proposal now for actual tests rather than general recommendations.
Gotcha, okay.
And that means, go through the process that all the APFO recommendations are going to go through with DPZ and with the council and adoption and everything else that's already down the road.
And was the LUTRAG committee also an ad hoc committee formed by the county executive?
I think that's the correct way to describe it.
I think, yeah, I'm not sure. I wasn't here when LUTRAG began, so, but I do believe that
It
might.
was formed in a very similar
Yeah.
manner to this, and they made formal recommendations to the administration. And,
I think it's been on a complete streets, didn't it? Or was it a separate thing?
It's part of.
Both, it was mentioned in the Complete Streets resolution. to have a committee. I don't think it had the Lutrac name at that point. Came up with that at the start of the committee. Yeah.
Brent's got his hand up.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brent. Missed you.
So, thinking big, I know we have a hardcore bicyclist in our audience here. Bicycle Master Plan gave us over a very long period of time, a plan to work toward, a guide to what is adequate and what is capital expenses needed to get there. I'm actually quite surprised we don't have a bicycle test. You see, we're looking at Montgomery County things. Those caps came straight out of the Montgomery County presentation we had a month or two ago. However, I don't see many recommendations that near Montgomery County's, was it LR, local, LR, what, pardon me, mixing up the acronym, LATR. They have a very extensive transportation plan that breaks it down by planning areas, bus types, multimodal, future growth, capital expenses, the whole 9 yards. Montgomery County is not known for being very supportive of APFO, but it does have a very extensive traffic test, which I think we should take a closer look at and mirror if there are opportunities to see in there. Because anything on the capital budget that's a one-time expense that grows with development is fair game. Even something like a maintenance yard for the RTA buses, as we grow the maintenance yards, we need a service, be a fair item to assess. I'm just going to end with think big. It took a decade for us to even get the opportunity to talk about this again. And I'd rather not be looking at the clock while people are being run over in my neighborhood. I think we can do some things to improve the safety of everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, I just brought this up again here to, we were really trying to keep this as a reasonable to implement, and simple to understand and implement. So we're not proposing a lot of new complex tests here. It's building off of what they're already doing. The bike lane example, it does get very complicated when you're looking at roadways and trying to assess whether they're, the level of service or the level of safety for bicyclists, and then the mitigations tend to be on the widening side, finding room, widening roadways to provide bicycle facilities. It gets very complex, very expensive, very much into right-of-way issues. We try to really focus on things that we think are implementable right now, and not super complicated to add to the existing APFO.
I don't think that was clear. So I see proposed complete streets APFO additions. However, that doesn't have the specificity that you have in the later slides. So is there anywhere written down already in a report, in a something, where it says, this is our written recommendation, that we could just open it up and adopt it?
Cut and paste.
Other than what's on these slides, no. I mean, it could be
You can
put into
send
that format because this slide is the description of the pedestrian crossing tests without the example, just the criteria. And then this slide is the transit test without the example. So it's these two slides, slide 11, slide 3. Those are the criteria for the tests.
Okay. Because I was trying to come up with specific measures.
See what you're saying, yeah. You're looking for a reference basically where it's all spelled out.
To get to Jen's point, perhaps we can craft something to say a recommended motion to recommend adopting the transportation test for pedestrian crossing as outlined in Exhibit 1 and the bus stop mitigation as outlined in Slide 2.
Yeah.
We can craft that.
Yeah, I mean, we can provide this in a different format if that helps.
Yes.
If it's in a memo format, or, I don't know if it's a full report, but it could certainly be in a memo.
Yeah,
Or broken down like she's saying, he's saying, or broken down into something that says, paragraph, 1, Article 2, kind of the same way they do legislative, documents, just something so that we could just point to, right, in a motion.
So if I may offer, Chris can come back, or email me and like go back and talk with his chief, yeah, and to other people in his division and kind of come back with something after this discussion and email it out and I can send it to you. And that can be your starting point for discussion if that's where you all choose to go with this testing criteria. Is that fair for next time? Because I will say it's 7:00. We have until 8:30 and there's some other items we wanted to get through. So not trying to push the chair, but
Yeah.
yeah, we only gave 25 minutes, but I love the robust discussion. So I think it was great.
Me too.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm always reluctant to cut it off because we're gonna be coming to this, so we might as well be prepared.
Yeah.
Get answers while we can from somebody who knows. So. Anything else?
And I know where he lives if we need to bring him back again, like right across the hall.
Right beneath you.
Thank you, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Actually, I have I guess, closing remark. Is there a reason or why the list of motions that we have here, we decided to call them parking lot motions?
It's just a suggestion.
Is it, okay, so every trip that we take here in Howard County generally starts or stops in a vast, desolate wasteland of asphalt. And I think it impoverishes the spirit in a way that, these were all deliberate decisions. And I think we have an opportunity to make different decisions. And so an APFO committee in 20 years may have park motions or stream motions. Because a parking lot's become a less salient part of our everyday lives.
I'll take responsibility for the term. I threw it out 3 or 4 meetings ago when we were just talking. I said, let's set up a parking lot where you shove the ideas that we need later on. I think it just carried on.
And I think I've heard that term used before for when you're kind of thinking about things, you're going to come back to it, like in facilitation called parking lot. But I appreciate the beauty of your poetry. And you'll love the next thing that we're calling the back lot, so.
It's not a parking lot for cars, it's a parking lot. Thank you, appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Did you stop sharing
Oh.
screen? Okay. I think you just shut your laptop. That's it. Now we're stuck, Chris.
So what happens when I leave?
We can't get
Just
out of
look
it.
at that all night.
Would you like me to pull up the back lot?
Speaking of parking lots.
Yeah, I can bring that.
I'll turn it over to you, Linda, and just talk about where we are with our parking lot and our rear lot.
I wasn't sure rear lot, back lot, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, front lot, back lot, rear lot, movie lot, I don't
I
know.
was gonna say.
Drive
that's
limit.
a movie term.
Yeah. I think, okay. Okay, now I can, okay.
Okay, if I go.
Hold on, no.
Unlock his handcuffs.
Yeah, let's see. Definitely.
There we go, okay, yes, now you may leave. Thank you so much, Chris, I
Guys,
appreciate
Good luck with
it.
everything.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So I didn't hear back from many of you, so I took the liberty then, and we can change all of this. But talking about, motions that were kind of moot at this point, given the direction of our last meeting. So, I think unless, correct me if I'm wrong, pretty much all of the school motions, I believe, are null and void.
I have a point of order here with that, because that's not my understanding of how we left things. Todd asked if some of us would go through this, and there's a lot of them that can be combined that are very similar to each other, so to speak, a lot. But we were talking about the fact that we did vote 12-3 to discuss to pass Jeremy's motion and talk about a new system. Todd said that he was concerned about the time we have left being able to proceed with maybe some more details on that situation versus being able to have the time to talk about motions that are dealing with our current AFO system, right? And, several of us talked about the fact that the council may or may not want to do Jeremy's motion that we're recommending. They would not be appreciative of our long, lengthy service in this meeting and not have a lot of things discussed, like percentages, wait times, massive things in our current system that everyone wants to be heard about. And so I was kind of suggesting at the end, well, why don't we do a little quick conversation, like a straw poll, a raising of hands, so we're not debating every little one of those motions that are not about this new system, but about our current system, and at least get ourselves on record as to everyone's feeling about what they would want the current system to look like if the council didn't change it. And Todd then responded and asked a few of us to put together our thoughts on that. And it's fine if we don't want to talk about that tonight, that's fine. But I'm sorry to interrupt and have this question because you were kind of presenting that we were just going to eliminate those, and that wasn't my understanding. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I was taken from the point of motions that we were discussing. So that's a secondary conversation, I guess, in my mind, from the motions that we're making, moving forward from the point of where the committee left off with regard to the new system that was moved last week. So that's where I was moving from. Do you mind if I just go through this really quickly, Mr. Lovelace, and then we can just start the discussion? So, and then, correct me or change, we can change any of this. So my thoughts were, because of that, the schools tests were, not part of the future and full discussion of where we were moving forward. But except for, it seemed to me that even though the UPP model was moving forward, there was still room to have discussion with exempt affordable housing, accessible housing, and minor subdivisions. I think that was still appropriate to have in this discussion if you wanted to have that with regard to our current conversation. And again, the LIHTC, MIHU from APFO, and then discussion with the surcharge with regard to it. Still seemed like there might be some more discussion that could be fitted into that. And then obviously the roads, different testing criteria, we haven't gotten to that, which we just heard about, some of that with the multimodal. And then we have a lot of APFO adjacent points of order to discuss as well that are still kind of, I guess, on this backlot to be discussed to move forward. So that's all I wanted to just share with you. We still had a lot of other items to discuss. And I took out a lot of the school testing and allocation because of the allocation charts, if we are moving forward with a model that does open up for the UPP, that I would think now the schools test, the allocation chart is still is more relevant now than ever with regard to allocating resources and units in the county. So that's all I wanted to share. Again, this is your discussion, so that's where I landed.
Yeah, and I don't think you're off, and I'll get you in a second. I don't think you're off in what you're representing, but we have to finish something. And we have a certain number of meetings. And we voted 12-3 to pursue the UPP model. We have to give that vote the due consideration that it earned when it passed 12-3. So there are a number of things that we need to focus our attention on to finish that, first of all. We definitely have to get to the transportation issues. I think some of the issues that came up tonight are valid and we need to discuss them. I know there are other items on the list that are relevant irrespective of the UPP or the current ADFL model for schools testing. So when I said, and I did, that if you want to leave things on the list for consideration, we will leave them on the list. What I don't know is when we get to them, because we have to finish something. We have a public hearing coming up in May. We have 3 meetings before then. This is one of them. We've used half of our time tonight already, and we haven't even gotten back to the model that passed 12-3. So that's why she's categorizing, Linda's categorizing these motions that no longer appear to have the same level of relevancy with the UPP model as they did with the previous APFO model for schools testing. They're still there. They're just not at the top of the list anymore because we have some significant issues to consider and address that we're going to start tonight. I don't know that we're going to vote on anything tonight because there's 3 major categories to start looking at with respect to the UPP model. So with that, I'll pass it to Brent. Go right ahead.
Thank you. We got right out the gate with a vote on whether or not to eliminate street surcharge fees. Guess what? We voted.
Eliminating school capacity.
Sorry, not fees, school capacity.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Terms. And it was voted to be, retained, maybe only by one vote, but it was voted. Further on, we have another consideration which says get rid of it, and it also passed. Just by the nature, had we been restrictive and started eliminating or declaring anything irrelevant that gets rid of school capacity tests, your item wouldn't even come into consideration. Basically, we're applying rules to things when they're advantageous, but not when they're disadvantaged. We can get through this. I've been through this. It's a matter of, if there's clearly something that has little to no support, the discussion is going to be very quick and votes are going to be very quick. But dismissing concepts and ideas that may be relative to what comes out of the final result is very important. Some of these things are extremely important to people outside this room rather than a handful of us. And saying that we need to strike them or they're not relevant anymore is, I think, a little disingenuous.
The issue is not, are they or aren't they relevant? The issue is whether or not they're central to the decision that was made in a 12-3 vote that we have to continue to flesh out so that we can deliver a product at the end of our deliberations to the county council and the county executive for their consideration.
In view of this discussion, we offer suggestions and approach. Some of us, we did our homework, but didn't report it in terms of motions that I made that I'm willing to withdraw. And I have a list of them right now that I'm willing to withdraw. And I would suggest that if others have done the same thing, go through that. And then, but hearing the passion that folks have about what's left, go through.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
I'll be quick, I promise.
Mhm.
We have various ones of us have said several times that there's nothing wrong with making motions that conflict with other motions and to be heard. I think that the concern is all shared, that we have to finish. It's hard to figure out how to prioritize things when there's so much left and you know what's left we don't have time for. I agree with you, but I was making a suggestion, just like his good suggestion, to have a conversation versus debate, timing, everybody's going to talk, it's going to take forever, have a motion. You know what I mean? Like to have a more informal thing. Like, for instance, let me give you a quick example. Say you really love Jeremy's new system. You really hope the council does it. The council doesn't do it. And you would have liked to have gone on record saying, well, I want high schools to be 120. And you never got the chance to go on record to say that. And they have no recommendation on what the majority of the APO review committee wanted to do with the current system. That's the only point I wanted to lay out there. I do think that we could do a little quick things, like Brent's saying, hey, if there's very little interest in something, we don't have to go through and give everybody 5 minutes to talk about it and take forever and then have a vote where 3 people like it. You know what I mean? We could do some straw polls. We could do, the first thing we should do, I agree with Paul, is everyone needs to say what motions they've put forward that they still want to do. Because that's going to take a lot right out, boom. Then we'll know what we're doing with it. People still really want to be heard. And then we need ideas on how to figure out how to get them to be heard that's fair.
She already asked people to do that and people didn't get back to her.
And so we need.
So it's not that people didn't
Super
have
do
the
it.
opportunity, because she asked people to do that and didn't get response.
Well, there may have been some confusion then, because are you talking about 2 meetings ago or the last meeting? Because at the last
Between the
meeting,
last-
though, at the end of the last meeting, Todd did ask Dan and Jeremy and I, and he even said, don't worry about having it for the next one. You can have it for the one after that. Go through and see which ones you think can be combined. I spent 4 hours on this. And, it's just something.
So I'd like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion that tonight we change our agenda. And instead of talking about these things that were marked out, that we move down to where nothing's marked out, which I think is the, can you scroll down to where nothing's marked out?
This is it.
This is it.
Oh, this is it. Oh, no.
Yeah, this is the original
This is the
that I sent out.
No. Can you show me the one that you had where it had the stuff marked out? Because there was a point where nothing was marked out. So my motion would be that for tonight, we start where nothing is marked out talk about that, change the agenda and ask everybody before our next meeting to send you an email confirming, removing, and let's pick up that next time we come so we can get some of this done tonight. So in other words, we'll be doing things out of order. I would like to make a motion to the committee that we consider tabling this meeting, moving on to the next thing, coming back to it at the next meeting, and changing the agenda. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second. The next, the first uncrossed out item is the roads section.
Right, so we would start with roads, go back to schools, right? Because
You're saying to
I
start
have a
roads right
question.
now?
yes,
Tabling what?
that we change the agenda and we table these motions. So everybody gets a chance before our next meeting to go through. And because there is a point where none of that is in there, so why don't we start there?
No, here.
Do that, try to get that done and come back to this at the next meeting, and we ask everybody to take the time.
Point of order, there's nothing in the
Yeah.
agenda that says that this is what we have to do next.
Okay,
Yeah, there,
it says a continuation, right? So
of motions and discussions is generally.
But you're asking to do that anyways. You're just saying, I'd like the next thing to be roads. So we
Sure.
don't actually need the motion in the second and a vote.
you do, but
Yeah, no,
I think you do, because you changed the agenda.
The chair could do it, I think.
He's like, whoa. I just feel like this is clearly something that everybody's passionate about. I don't want to do it right here now because it seems like people aren't prepared. Let's go to something where there isn't a lot of conflict, try to get through that and come back to this.
Here's my concern. All of this is integrated. It seems to me that the schools test, the old schools test and the new proposed UPP that we're considering will remain the most significant, controversial, and important part of the work that we do. My concern is if we turn away from that and then we say we're going to come back to it, and we only, now we'll have 2 meetings before our public hearing.
But we don't have anybody speaking next meeting, do we?
No, we don't.
So we'll have the whole meeting just to dedicate to that.
Agreed. There's a lot of work to do with fleshing out the UPP. There's 3 separate areas of work and consideration that has to be done. I know there are 3 different groups that have been working on those 3 different areas. If we can get that done in one night, that's great. I'm not sure that we will. We spent, basically an hour tonight, 45 minutes, on something that we thought would take 20. Which is fine because I think that was important and I think it probably will facilitate our next round of discussions in that regard. So I think it's helpful. I'm very concerned that we have a fixed deadline now for the public hearing, and we're not going to be able to put together any kind of coherent plan if we're not extremely cautious with how we use our time and where we direct our attention. And the most important thing I continue to represent is how the schools test will work going forward. So I'm a little reluctant to completely turn away from it for the rest of the night tonight and go and put all that aside and go to transportation.
Well, you're the chairperson.
No, I know that. This is all for discussion. And I'm also concerned, and Antoine, maybe I'm wrong, I want the transportation side of things to be well thought out and ready to discuss. And I'm not sure that that's in fact the case right now. I want Phil to be able to chime in where necessary. Antoine, I want you to be able to make sure that you're ready to go. And I don't want to push you up to the top of the list now and have you feel somehow compromised in your ability to represent your position.
Nah, I wouldn't be compromised.
He's ready to go.
Toastmasters style. I wouldn't be compromised, but I do believe doing things in an order that we can all agree with. So if schools needs to be handled post haste so that we can be there, let's handle that post haste. I'm more than happy with putting transportation down for a hot moment. We do need clarity on the motions based on the presentation tonight. And that will make things a lot easier and also add to digestion from what was said tonight. So I'm fine with that end. as well as for some of the other items that are in the unassessed category of our parking lot. There may really be some working, pruning that's useful there. So if we want to run with schools, you will see me fight on that.
And I know Jenna had her hand up, but Phil, if you have a comment.
No, I agree. I would draw my second.
It's fine.
I just wanted to say I'm taking the slides and turning them into motions. So that, and they should be ready to go.
2 seconds. You can.
We'll send them to her so she can put them in the text, right?
Do we want to wait for
That's
Office of
fine.
Transportation to get back to us, or?
I just didn't, if he wants to move, if anyone wants to move with transportation, the first two are done. So,
Oh. Well, that's right. I think you would do them.
What?
do what you want, but
Am I
I'm just trying to-
It's worth a shot, right?
What?
Is it worth a shot to do the UVP tonight?
Here's my
We
concern.
might finish.
Here's my concern. If the schools are the most important and the fees associated with the UPT are the most important, it seems to me we have to understand and resolve them before we start adding on fees in other areas without understanding how the whole fits together.
I agree.
And if we pass things that add $3,000 a unit here and $4,000 a unit there, and now all of a sudden, now we're going back to the UPT and we're saying, well, now we're talking about APFO fees, total APFO fees of $60,000, $70,000 a unit. Then I think the schools may end up not being able, we may not be able to do what we need for the schools because our per unit cost for APFO in the aggregate ends up being so much that APFO is going to deliver 100% of nothing. If we don't get the housing growth that's anticipated by HOCO by design, which is what we've been asked to look at, then it doesn't matter what the fees are. If we're not adding any housing units, we're not getting any fees. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and thinking about that when we're looking at the whole. And I think the primary needs to be the schools. And if we can find ways to add transportation and other things, that's what we should do.
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest, okay, so we have these buckets. We have the schools bucket, the roads bucket, and then the APFO adjacent, and then the miscellaneous bucket of areas that we wanted to make recommendations on. So we still have a lot of area to cover. We've only touched the schools and roads, as the chair said. So we do have those two other areas that we need to prepare for, that we have to put out for the public hearing. Our public hearing notification is going out in the newspaper on April 17th. We are posting just the public hearing ad, the date, the time, and where it's going to be located. But I think in all fairness, we need to have this report ready at least 2 weeks in advance of the public hearing. So that way the community has something to digest and respond to. So when they come to the public hearing, that's not the first time they're seeing the information. So I'm just trying to give you all a time frame of when things should be ready to go, so to speak.
Yes.
Linda made a really good point that when we think about the public hearing, if we don't have the UPP, we have some concerns about beefing up some details in the UPP suggestion, right? We can still work on that after the public hearing. They at least know 90% of what we're saying with that as an idea to get feedback on. And then if we don't have couple other things done for the public hearing to have some meat as to what they're reacting to, I'd almost rather have 4 things that are half done than 1 thing that's fully done before the public hearing, just the point.
Well, that I understand, and that does make some sense. But I'll give you a concrete example, because I know that, Paul is here with the deck to talk about some of how we make the Montgomery County model specifically more applicable to Howard County. I think if we go to the public hearing and we haven't nailed that down, and we can't be very specific on these are the Montgomery County models, I think there would be a lot of gasps in the room because, okay, tier 3 in Montgomery County is 135% of capacity. Well, we don't have any schools in Howard County that are tier 3. So how can you recommend a model that says that your tier 3 percentage surcharge is at 135% when we know that's not a single school in the county with that? So that's where it becomes for me, at least directly relevant to our work and to our presentation to deal with beefing it out, developing a model that makes sense, considering where Howard County is now. In conjunction with, I know with Dan and Jen are going to talk about, it looks like that's probably beginning of next meeting, not tonight. But I think we have to be able, if we're going down this path, which we voted 12-3 on, we need to be able to be 100% prepared to talk about that at that public hearing.
We start talking about something instead of talking about things.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I just have a question regarding the process. For efficiency, if we can't get off of this starting block, would it be efficient or is it even possible to have a subcommittee meet? Because we have almost a month, not quite a month, but almost a month from now to the next meeting to specifically talk about the UPP stuff and bring it back to this group for a larger conversation so that tonight we can talk about other things to move on. Is that even allowed?
I don't know.
Well,
Not in a quorum.
As long as you have a quick
Just
number.
to have a conversation to bring something unified back.
I would argue that in some ways we're already doing that. I know that Paul and Aaron have been working on something. I know that Jeremy and Laura have been working on something. I know that, you and Jen are tasked with looking at something. And those are sub-quorum activities that you'd be bringing back to the group at large. Some of those are anticipated to be presented tonight. I know yours and Jen in detailed discussion wouldn't be tonight, but I think we can touch on it, and so we know where we're headed. That's perfectly fine. So I think we're kind of moving in that direction. But I'm open to suggestion. But I'm with Jeremy. It's like, let's go.
well, then let's let Paul give his thing and Jeremy do his thing. And then in this time that we have, everybody go back and say, this I want to change, this I don't want to do, so we can get a new list. So when we come to the next meeting, it's distilled.
All right, so that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna move to Paul. He's gonna make his presentation. I'm gonna just preface it with one thing. There are three primary categories of activity we need to adjust the Montgomery County model to Howard County. One is, how are we gonna define our numerator and our denominator for school capacity? And that's what Dan and Jen have already given some thought to, but can't prepare for tonight. It's just turnaround wasn't enough. That's number one. Number two is the percent limits on tiers, which would mean 105, 110, 115, 105, 120, 135, depending what tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 school level fees are associated with the Montgomery County model. That's what Paul's going to do tonight, and he's ready to go tonight. The third is the premium levels on the tiers that are agreed to, meaning that it might be the 20% premium on a tier 1, a 40% on a tier 2, a 60% on a tier 3, and they stack just like they do in Montgomery County. That's what Jeremy and Laura have spent some time on and have been coordinating actually their thoughts with Montgomery County and had some back and forth with them. So those are the three categories that we need to focus our attention on. Those are the three groups of motions that I would want to be pursuing. No later than the end of next meeting, I'm hoping we have all those defined. Right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. I think we're a little handicapped because until we define the numerator and the denominator, which actually gets to what our percentages are, we're a little bit compromised, but I don't think we're going to have a lot of controversy there anyway. So I look forward to Dan and Jen's presentation, but I'm going to turn it over to Paul for now.
This will be quick, 10 minutes less.
Time in.
Todd and Aaron and I had a conversation earlier this week. Go to slide 2, please. And what you'll see, you've seen before. This is straight from Jeremy's presentation last week, but I'm going to ask you to focus on the upper left corner. There's two different columns there: utilization rates and seat deficit standards. And in the middle, there's an or an and, which is very important. The utilization rate standards are the same across all types of schools, elementary, middle, and high. The seat deficit standards vary by elementary, by middle, by high. Keep that in mind, and go to the next slide, please. They've been updated. These are the same, the numbers that you see on the far left column were effective January 1st of 2025 for Montgomery County. The same categories, slightly different numbers. The seat capacity thresholds have all come down. The percentages have remained the same at 105, 120, and 135. And we're going to use these numbers as a starting point rather than the numbers that were in Jeremy's presentation, because they're more up to date. Next slide, please. This was also from Jeremy's presentation, but his coloring used the numbers from the first slide, which were the 2024 numbers. So, and he's got all three: elementary on the left, middle in the middle, high school on the right. We're going to now look at each of those as a single slide so you can get a little bit better feel of what the numbers look like. And I've also changed the rank order of them, which will make it very clear. Next slide, please. We're going to start with elementary schools. These are all the same elementary schools, but they've simply been rank orders. Those numbers is out of order, but that's okay. Oh no, I know how to do that. So going column by column, the left-hand column is the school. The second is the local rated capacity taken from our charts for 2027. The third column is the projected enrollment at each of those schools from our outflow school capacity charts. Same charts you've seen in prior meetings. The fourth column and the fifth column are using the Montgomery County UPP thresholds as were defined in the prior slide, the updated 2025 thresholds. And the coloring is as follows. With green, the column 4 is tiers for the utilization rate, the utilization capacity, the percent of local rated capacity. Column 5 is the seat deficit. They're two different tests. And remember, for elementary schools, it was 4, I believe. And the other two, no, that's correct, or it was utilization rate standard greater than 105% or the seat rate capacity. For elementary, and the other two were and. So what you can see here is that those that are in green under column 4 would be assessed a tier 1 UPP threshold. There's none that are yellow that would be assessed at tier 2. It would be between 105 and 120. And there's one that's greater than 120, which is Bryant. Which is Bryant Woods. So that's one test. And then all of those that are in white would not be assessed a UPP fee. If you use the seat deficit, there is 6 schools that would be assessed a UPP fee. The one on top, it's in red, would be assessed the highest fee. The one in the middle, the 3 in the middle would be assessed the tier 2 fee, and the 2 in green would be assessed the tier 3 fee. What we've done as just a jumping off point for discussion is modify, really making two suggestions here. One, modify the tier levels. Instead of them being 105, 120, and 135, because hardly any that are that high. Let's go back to the percentages that are currently in place, 105, 110, 115. Again, plugging into all schools and using those as our tier measures. If it's greater than 105, but less than 110, it would be a tier 1 threshold. If it's 110 to 114, it would be a tier 2 threshold. And if it's 115 or above, it would be assessed a tier 3 UPP. You can see how the numbers change there, and that there's more that would be assessed a higher fee than what you see in earlier Montgomery County example. On the seat side, and this will become, well, hold that thought, but our thought is, you'll see when you get to the other two schools, is the seat size redundant. It throws confusion into the matter. And our recommendation would be just get rid of it altogether, because 10 seats at Bryant Woods is very different than 10 seats at a much larger elementary school that's not full capacity. So to simplify things, the proposal out of the box is just get rid of it altogether. But you needed to see how the numbers. I'm going to do before I flip to the next, well, let's just go to the next slide, which is the middle schools. It'll be easier to read because same exact logic. But you can see under the Montgomery County model with tiers at 105, 120, and 135, there's no one that's above a tier 1 UPP. If you use the 105, 110, 115, then it's the same schools, but it's a different fee. And essentially it weights towards a higher fee. And again, no change, the seat model doesn't really add any value to it. Even if it's an and here, or if it was an or. If it was an or, it would actually be bad, because we only have two schools that could concede it. Let's go to the high schools. Same kind of thing here. You see, we have, one school that's a tier 2 and one that's a tier 1, as opposed to 2 that would be tier 1. Again, this is one proposal. If there's different numbers that you want to try out for that, it's very simple to modify those numbers and change the grids and the colors. But wanted to put the concept out there to really two different ideas here. One, do not use the Montgomery County percentage of LRC. Use a unique Howard County model. And 2, get rid of the seat model, because it's just too difficult to administer, and it's going to make it confusing. I'll stop there and open for any questions or thoughts.
Dan's first up.
First, thank you, Paul. And I forget who else worked with you on that. But
Aaron.
thank you, Aaron. And again, just as I said with Jeremy, I understand the numbers you used because it was the APFO numbers that were out there. But there are updated number for projections in the feasibility study, just so everybody's looking and understanding the same data. Going through this, utilizing what would be in there, there would be one school that would be a tier. That's it. So I appreciate what you said about not using the seat standard, because we looked at that as well, and it doesn't make any sense. It is redundant, especially when we get to the school, like you said, Bryant Woods. It's never going to qualify because of that. So going back and looking just at the percentages of the 5, 10, and 105, 110, and 115, there'd be 7 schools that would be open based off percentage only, 3 middle schools, and no high schools. So I appreciate what you're saying. A lot of what you said is the logic that me and internal staff had as well. It does give credence to the current percentages used in APFO. And our understanding is the motion to go this way is because it kind of supplements a wait time with funding, and this would still do that. So,
The trade-off is the funding comes in right away and the wait time goes away right away.
right. That's it.
Thanks. And anybody else? Yeah, Brent. Someone?
Rolling through some of the numbers. Montgomery County is weird. They put in this test with seats and percentages. If you look at their original, guidelines, they had much higher percentages and it basically gained it. Where it looked like 105%, it actually was 107, 108, 109, depending on the size of the school. They passed a bill which changed those numbers and it effectively made the number of seats and the percentages identical. It didn't matter which way you calculate it. So it was a redundant test. So the removal at that layer makes no difference positive or negative. So, yeah, if you wanted to remove seats from the equation, that seems to make logical sense. But ultimately, big picture. We're here to make sure we have adequate facilities for kids as growth occurs at the time, concurrency. We have something that people can really chomp down on. Developers are like, hey, I can get it go right away. And residents are like, ooh, we get some more money. To me, if I got a $1 raise for the year, that's more money, but that isn't something to come home about. What we need to know is exactly what the cost is per student. On a scale, it changes. The amount of or the rate of students that we get needs to be calculated to actually come out in the end to provide us adequate facilities. This is a very complex way that doesn't assure that. It assures more, but doesn't guarantee enough. And that puts us in a very precarious situation. We say to the kids, it's okay to go into overcrowding. We just messed up on the math. And those mitigation fees, they're great, but they also need to be applied. You just can't add 2 seats to the school. You could, they'd be very expensive. You have to have enough core space, you have to have enough cafeteria, all that good stuff. It's very strategic how you spend your money for the best use and make sure you have money. If we aren't calculating for the appropriate amount of capacity as development occurs, you're selling yourself short. And I will say this is a process, not a point in time. We reference that, oh, on this day, this is what we'll get. On tomorrow, we don't have any schools at 120%. Who cares? Put down for every contingency, put down the protections and protect the kids regardless of what the rates are. Let us go from there. Thank you.
Quick comment. Just to make a high level point, moving to this system, this new UPP system, I mean, you could have a very strong UPP depending on how you categorize what schools would fall into any one of these tiers, or you have a very weak one, using like common terminology that people say, more schools in a weight bin would be stronger, less schools in a weight bin would be weaker. So I think the system, works well, and really the nuts and bolts of it come down to, I think, how you define how any given school area falls into any one of these tiers. So that's just like the high level kind of takeaway on this thing. To Paul's point first, thanks for catching that 2024 versus 2025 discrepancy. I missed that, so appreciate you bringing that up. I think the and/or thing, I actually still have a different interpretation of how to apply that than I think you explained during your presentation. I don't want to bore everyone with like trying to work out the semantics of how that's defined. Other than to say it's confusing. And I think several people have said that. And I like the idea of just sticking with the utilization, whatever the numbers may be, instead of bringing in this whole seat thing, because it just adds a little complexity that would make it hard for the public to understand. And I think from the conversations we're even having in the room, I think we have multiple different understandings of whether it's and or and how they fit together. So I do like the idea of just, let's figure out what those utilization percentages are that would define the adequacy tiers and stick with that. That seems to make more sense to me.
Sandy, did you say you have updated projection numbers?
Yeah, in the 2024 feasibility study, which is on board docs. I mean, I could send it. I think
do you want me to send it right now to?
if you have it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the I believe it's in the feasibility study. It might be in the projection report, but yes.
Because
Yep,
they're updated
there are charts.
relative to the outflow. That wasn't the number you see before, correct?
So these charts are in APFO. This is the chart you see. The only difference is it compares it to the APFO percentage and puts a C next to it if it's closed. But these are the charts that are used for APFO.
That's where I pulled it from, but if these are more, those are the May, the one I did was for May.
Yeah, so again, APFO, the way it currently works right now, the APFO chart is the end of the prior year's process. So it's based off of prior projections. So these are more up-to-date
I'm
projections.
happy to take those numbers and punch them into here, and I'll get it to Linda, who can get everyone an updated chart.
I was just, Dan said that they're more updated from the fall than maybe when we had a presentation on them. I don't remember when we did that initial one, but anyway, you already said it. We can do it.
Yeah, I just like to point out, and this is not a popular subject, but these numbers never, utilization does not account for the portables, is that correct?
Correct.
Which are feasible classrooms with windows and multiple entrances that I see every morning. Which, again, I'm just looking at my high school where I work, 74 kids, those three classrooms probably hold about 74 kids. They're legitimate, utilized classrooms, whether they're built into the building, they sit in those every day, including my own child. And they are, I'd rather be sitting out there with windows all around me than sitting in the interior of the building, looking at four walls and the door. So they are viable, utilized seats that don't show up here, that we're not accounting for. So, I mean, realistically, most schools, I would say at this point, probably have portables. Is that a fair assessment?
A lot, I don't know if everyone, but a lot of them, yeah.
And there seems to be a huge negative connotation towards them. I just, in my opinion, as a 30-year educator in this county, I don't see it that way. And this is the first year that at Oklahoma High School, we have had that. I just want to put that out there.
Question. Does counting portables as capacity end up legally constraining their use to only classrooms? So if they were used for some other programming other than classrooms. If you counted portables as classrooms and that changed the capacity of the school, but the school wanted to use the portables differently, and they
Right, I
can't
see what
do
you're
that,
saying. Yeah.
would that change it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm asking because I wasn't getting the portable too, so I didn't really care. It was outside for 2 minutes. But does that change that? And if it doesn't, count away. If it does, we have to take a.
I'd like to make a motion. I think that nobody's made a motion yet. Can I make a motion? So it sounds like everybody agrees on removing the seat deficit, so I would like to make a motion that the committee, in their recommendations, say that we remove the seat deficit in our calculations. Can I do that? Okay, I'd like to make that motion. Would anybody want to second that?
Second.
Second, okay. Discussion. Is there discussion? Does it,
Yeah, kind of.
does anyone else want to talk? Then we can.
So the motion, just to clarify, so the motion is in determining the tiers,
Mhm.
fall
Just so you remove this, our recommendation as a committee
You're only using a utilization percentage.
is to
determine
remove,
what's-
well, I'm not saying that part. That's a whole nother section. I'm just saying just that we remove, our recommendation is that we remove the seat deficit component. Just that, just simple, just that. one.
Okay, because like Montgomery County uses the two things, right, with the.
Right,
AMP
that could be a
statement.
different motion.
So if we remove
Add
one,
that on.
presumably you're only left with using utilization.
Or somebody comes up with something else. I don't want to tie the two together.
Yeah.
I just want to make a motion that we remove the seat deficit. Okay? So it's something we can vote on that?
Yeah, talking vote.
Okay.
Hold on, let me just make sure I got it correct. So I think the chair's supposed to restate the motion.
Yep,
Okay.
you're supposed to restate the motion.
Okay, the motion is to remove the seat deficit standard from the Montgomery County model. And in its, with the Howard County model, we will not use a seat deficit standard in our future discussion.
Right, we're recommending they don't.
I'm just saying, yeah, my thing is just that we remove the seat deficit portion of the UPP altogether.
How about remove the seat deficit component to our UPP?
Yes.
Keep it simple.
Yes.
Okay,
let's keep it
okay.
simple.
Okay,
You're now chair.
thank you. I just need it simple and easy
No,
to
no,
type.
you
That's
got
fine.
write it down.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
We need an interpreter.
Thank you.
You're the interpreter.
You put your screen up on the.
I
She's working
can.
on it.
Okay.
That's what she said.
And who did the second?
Well, we had 2 seconds actually.
Either one of us, me or Jeremy, doesn't matter.
Give it to Dan.
Give it to Dan. Jeremy already had a motion.
Make it to the next part.
Okay. All right, are we ready to call for the vote?
Call for the-
Mr. Arterbright?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Casagrande?
Yes.
Mr. Crossley is absent. Mr. Domo?
Yes.
Mr. Essen?
Yes.
Mr. Glykoff?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Mrs.
Jones, sorry. I put Ms.
I'm in
Jones.
fashion.
Okay, Mrs. Jones?
Yes, well, yes.
Mr. Lovelace?
Also for intentional overcrowding, but this makes the potential go better.
So are you,
Yes.
Mr. Lubley?
Yes.
Ms. Mallow?
Yes.
Ms. Markovitz?
Yes.
Ms. Pantano?
Yes.
Mr. Scher?
yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Right, 14-1 and motion. Every vote counts.
Actually, you were the deciding vote on many of them, so.
Okay,
Two bills.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move, and we preface it by saying, if the information that we get from the others who are looking at information such as the numerator and denominator markedly changes how we understand school capacity, I would suggest that this motion be reconsidered down the road. But I would make a motion that we revise the school capacity in the school capacity figures in the original Howard County UPP, removing the Montgomery County school capacities and using the 105, 110, 115 for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 assessments.
Second.
Discussion? Yes.
Question that earlier we were discussing whether, I think, Paul, you might have said it, whether we should actually, maybe I don't remember who said, should we even look at those percentages first, which I think Brent had made some motions on early on in the process about looking at those thresholds that have previously existed and seeing if we need to refine those before we then go on adopting. When Brent started the process with the 95 and 100, so we've gone through a couple of them. Do we need to look at those before we can go that direction?
Well, I'll jump in. I'm sure Paul has thoughts too. The 105, 110, 115, in this case, to match up with the 105, 110, 115 in Howard County now, That's incidental, because they're not the same. The 105, 110, 115 in the current model are elementary overcrowding, middle school overcrowding, high school overcrowding. The 105, 110, 115 in Paul's motion is specifically tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Okay.
So it sounds like we're talking about the same thing, but we're really not.
It's apples to oranges.
Yeah. They incidentally match, but
The only other comment I'd add, and I echo what Todd said, but I would add that my preface to the motion was just, we may see when folks come back looking at the numerator and denominator that are used for current capacity, it may impact this significantly, which is why I suggest that we pass it with the understanding that we can come back to it and change it if we get new information.
All these things that we're considering are interrelated.
I'll also just point out that I think using the 105, 110, and 115 does have a connection. Because board policy 6010 indicates that while the target is 90 to 100%, the percentage for consideration of mitigation strategies, specifically redistricting or whatever, is at 110. And the way the Montgomery County model works is the actual percentage that is defined is that tier 2. So the 110 here is that, and then tier 1 and 3 are a certain percentage on either side of it, which is the 105, 110, 115 would follow that same model.
That makes sense.
Wish I could say that's what you're thinking.
Good job.
any other discussion? Jamie, are you?
Yeah,
Is
I'm just
that your
thinking,
answer?
no, I'm just thinking about how to phrase it. Yeah, no, I have a comment. So my comment is, so we're talking, and I think we all understand this, but we're talking about what defines each tier, right? And the way that Montgomery's tiers work is the percentage, and we're going to talk about this soon, but the percentage goes up 50% going from tier 1 to tier 2 and doubles from tier 1 to tier 3. So we're talking about twice as much money. So under this proposal, if a school is at 115%, it would pay twice as much as a utilization premium payment than it would if it was in tier 1.
No, because we haven't defined those.
Okay, we haven't defined those yet. I'm
In
just
the
saying,
Montgomery
if we
model,
were to use the
yes.
Montgomery County model
Right.
with these percentages as being proposed,
Yeah.
it's a significantly higher payment that would be owed for not as substantial of a change in utilization at a school.
I have a question, about the motion that was originally passed. I thought that the UPP, that was the 12-3 vote, was taking the Montgomery County model, meaning with a lot of details in it, like what they were charging already, how much the upcharges were for the tiers already. And I get that we said we had to make it fit to HOCO, and we're kind of trying to determine what does that mean. And I don't think we've done anything conflicting with the motion here so far. But I was confused when you said that we haven't decided yet how much the fees would be and the percentages attached to the tiers would be, because that's already defined in what I thought we already passed.
Well, it's as defined as what we're talking about now. That's the thing. I mean, the whole point was to pass the model that we would then make relevant to Howard County. Paul.
And I think, to your point, you're correct. Presently, it is that.
Okay.
Based on the motion. Yet there's folks diving deeper
Right.
into it to test the veracity of that.
Right, and I think.
Much like we did today with this,
Mhm.
does this really make sense?
Yeah,
for
all I'm
Howard
saying
County?
is that as a point of order, I think if we change the fee that is attached to the tiers, we need to amend the other motion, not just make a new
Yeah,
motion.
that motion's not up there. I don't see it
And then-
there anywhere.
I meant.
I have to scroll up. I mean, there's
There's been amendments, I guess, or
there's
amendments.
16 motions. So which motion are you looking for?
I
The one that we voted on that got us where we are today.
25 maybe?
Scroll down a little bit. Number
What did you
11
say?
right there.
It was 12
Yeah,
to
this-
15.
This one here.
Twelve three, it's next.
Oh, scroll down, scroll down. There you go.
This is it.
It's 12.
Yeah. Got it.
Well, it just says tailored to Howard County data.
Well,
So it just says Montgomery County approach tailored to Howard County data. That's all it says. So I think we're fine.
Well, it says the payment factor percentages are to use a similar tier percentages as Montgomery County.
Yeah,
And the-
modify.
And then the adequacy thresholds.
Yeah.
Should be developed using the Montgomery County approach tailored to Howard County.
Yeah, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, so we're tailoring that to Howard County, but it says we should be using a similar percentage as Montgomery County for the. So the tier
Yeah.
payments.
Similar, that replaces saying tailored to Howard County.
Yes.
I mean, all that's saying is we're moving away from an old model to the
Okay,
different model, I think.
okay,
But-
thank you.
but, Nick, right.
Understand.
Yeah, no, so I think what we've already done here is you've already removed on the previous motion, you removed that seat deficit component, which is outlined here. And then this is just the next part of that.
Mhm.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure it's it all is here in the motion, sorry, just quick.
The 100, 110, 115 is a hard fought battle item in the legacy APFO. It is different here. It's basically the levels of allowable intentional overcrowding, of which we don't know the actual outcome of it, the fee that we're exchanging. We don't know whether it's sufficient to meet the need. It may, we do the hard math on the whiteboard, we just don't know. So those levels or thresholds are just placeholders depending how you do the other components of the system. So, no great concerns there, but great concerns how they combine with follow-ons. And please forgive me, I need to go off the rails, but this is on the rails. We're looking at a Montgomery County thing for how they do their payment premiums. Are we applying the entire document? Because the entire document also says those payments have a localization factor. They only can be applied to a local school or an adjacent school, which would create 70 some individual zones or pockets of money.
So that's like the lockbox thing. We were thinking maybe that, so that's gonna be another motion, right? That you want a lockbox, so it goes to that. Because what we're trying to do is just say, here's our vague idea of what we want to do. So like my motion, his motion, you could make that motion after his motion, that you want to lockbox it. Because what we're trying to do is kind of, as Todd said in the very beginning, nail down what the UPP looks like to us.
And it's just a thing. We have a very unimportant thing that could be critically important depending on
And
the
that's the motion. you could-
localization factor. I'm
Right.
sure David will be able to talk about that.
Anything else? Anyone else? So call for the vote.
Oh, you have to restate it.
Oh, I have to restate the motion.
Did I get this?
Sorry.
Yeah.
You can just read it.
So revise the school capacity figures in the original UPP model to use 105, 110, and 115% for respectively tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. With the understanding that if new information is provided with respect to capacity, that the motion is revisited.
Friendly amendment, so to clarify, this is for all three school levels? Is that right?
Yes.
We want to apply it for all three?
And we're ESMSHS.
I don't think we need to amend it. I think we can just type it in. Type it in.
Oh.
Yes, this will apply to elementary, middle, and high school.
That's clear.
Good. All right, so that's restated. So let's call for the vote.
All right, Mr. Otterburn,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Casagrande,
Yes.
Mr. Cross is in here, Mr. Danville,
Yes.
Mr. Essen,
Yes.
Mr. Glykoff,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes, I'm just giving you a hard time.
that's Mr. Lovelace,
Do not support the concept or support this change.
Mr. Lubley,
Yes.
Ms. Mello,
Yes.
Ms. Markovitz,
Yes.
Ms. Pantano,
Yes.
Mr. Scherer,
Yes.
Mr. Wright.
Yes.
All right, passes 14 to 0. All right,
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Aaron. A lot of work.
thank you.
You can say something about lockbox in your money.
That was something several people wanted to talk about anyway.
I think we should talk about that.
The seat like capacity and then for emotional.
Since we've removed the seat capacity test, what, are we adding the percentage amounts, or are we commensurately increasing the dollar amounts or the percentage of the threshold that gets applied, when you exceed the capacity amounts? Because the way that they use there was the two-dimensional box where if you exceeded one and then the other, it would, each step going up would give you a higher percentage impact fee. Are we also going to increase the impact fee? If we remove the seat test, which we did, are we going to also increase the amounts for the, as you exceed the thresholds?
But I think we even have them. Well, no, we're not there yet.
Okay, so
We are
planning on that.
Oh, yeah, that,
Okay. Just for like common terminology, those percentages, like the way Montgomery County, they call them payment factors. So like that's the terminology, project work or whatever, the percentages, because we could have a common language.
Yeah, tier, it has that percentage,
So-
so it doesn't necessarily have to have the seat factor. It falls within that tier, it has that.
Going into,
seat factor.
I want to go into discussion mode just for a minute.
No,
So,
seat factor is just
we can turn it over to
standard
Jeremy and
evaluation.
Laura to talk a little bit about where they are
Okay. I'm
with determining those
Payment factors,
payment factors for each of the tiers.
modifiers, was it?
How much more money do you want to pay?
So.
Yeah.
You've run
Yeah,
with whatever
okay.
you have right now. I'm not thinking.
Yeah.
Just remember.
Okay, well, I'll just give the update, and it might help the discussion if we go back to the slide that you showed, that you pulled from my slide. Were you sharing, or was Linda sharing?
I got you.
He wants to bring up
Linda,
a
could
slide.
you bring up the slide from Paul's presentation? I think it was the second one that had those charts. I think this will really facilitate it, just like the Montgomery County charts on, I think it was the second or third.
This one or the one?
This one, yeah, right here. So what we've just decided on, right, is we're gonna strike the seat from the top left big table here. We're gonna strike seat deficit. We're ignoring that. And to determine what tier any given school is in, we're just using utilization standards. And it's gonna be, if you're over 105%, you're tier one. If you're over 110%, not 120 as it says there, we just voted on. If you're over 110%, you're tier two. And if you're over 115%, you're tier three. So that's where we are right now. That's how we determine the tiers. Now, in
And
Montgomery,
just to clarify that, if you are at 105, you're in tier one. If you're
Yeah,
at
greater than or equal than.
104.9,
Yeah.
you're no UPP.
Yeah, greater than or equal then.
Yep.
Yep. And so in Montgomery County, if you're at any one of those tiers, and if it's an elementary school at tier one, you pay 16 2/3% of, applied to the, well, for us, the way we're adopting this would be applied to the school surcharge, $7.50 for market rate housing, $7.50 per square foot for market rate housing. And those are percentages, right? So if it's elementary school, if it's tier one, 16 2/3. If it's tier two, it's double that, 13 or 33 1/3. If it's tier three, it's 50%. You guys could see the numbers right now. So now we're trying to figure out what should those payment factors be, given the changes that we just agreed to make to classify any given school in a tier. So I guess the question that Laura and I had when we batted around is, well, how in the heck did Montgomery County come up with those specific numbers? So we asked them. They said, I don't know. That's the long and short of it.
Long and short of it.
They said the thing that was important was how they increased from tier to tier, how from tier 1 to tier 2 it doubled. And then it essentially, added more. So like how it went up significantly from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 was something that they really cared about. Like if you look at middle school, it's the easiest because it's round numbers. It went from 10% to 20% to 30%. But even you look at elementary schools and in high school, it followed that same
Makes
pattern of
sense.
essentially doubling. But like, I don't know, like I had the question, like, well, why is elementary school tier 1 at 16 2/3 when middle school is at 10% and high school is at 13 1/3%? Why do they?
It's 3 1/3% per grade year. Elementary school is 5/3.
That's what I
It's
thought,
5/3. Middle school is 3/3 and high school is 4/3.
Yep. So what you're saying is for every grade level in a school, since in elementary school, you have K to 5, that's 6, right? In middle school, you only have 3 grade levels. In high school, you have 4 grade levels. It's 3 1/3 for each grade level. And that kind of makes sense, I guess, on a.
Sure.
Number of kids, kind of.
Thought. Remember how Brent had said that this system for MoCo, that they do direct it to the local school or adjacent school? That probably has something to do with it because they're incentivizing not routing or getting more money for having more crowded elementary schools. And
Say that
they're,
again?
well, they're directing the money right where the project is gonna be. Right? And they're charging more if you have an elementary school that is having to pay those fees. So it seems like they are trying to have a goal to get more money for elementary schools. And because they're applying it right there, they likely are looking at, some history or stuff they know is coming down the pike and just where it's going to have an effect.
Why do you think middle's less than high school?
I would have a theory. I didn't call them, but,
Fewer grades.
well, not just that, but elementary school, you have a greater diversity of type of classroom, meaning pre-K and kindergarten and stuff like that, that has different requirements than a middle school. And then when you go over middle school into high school, you get into more like CTE classrooms and stuff like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
One of the biggest mathematical things in here is your school surcharge. Is it accurate? Let's say it's 0, whatever, you get rid of it. Everything here goes to times 0. That was the extremes visualized. Ideally, the school surcharge is sufficient to meet the need in and of itself. How many of you believe that the current school surcharge fee is paid for the exact thing that needs to bid out for dollars per square foot for kid to add for a persistent kid that comes in the system and stays there? I'll go straight to it. It doesn't. And the reason is Mr. Brownell, and I'm calling him by name, he fairly reports the way they calculate student yields is based on the first year of occupancy instead of the perpetual need that comes from it. But by only doing first year of occupancy, you shave off roughly 60% of the calculation of school surcharge fees. A typical house in Howard County, if it's paying market rate for school capacity, should be paying out roughly, we've done this calculation over and over, 5% of its sales price. And make that relatable. You've got $1 million house, that's pretty hefty fee. You've got a $200,000 townhome, it's not that outline.
Oh, I'd like you to find a $200,000 town. I dare you. I dare you to find a $200,000.
I have one across the street from you, but okay.
Mm.
So anyway, our goal for Purview is to make sure we get adequate capacity as the county grows. We know that surcharge fee is not performing as indicated. That's going to mess up our math on the right-hand side. Unless you're just doing it for incentivization. We have a perfect school surcharge fee and we're charging above it. That brings us up to potential legal issues. It could be challenged, and I guarantee you it will be challenged. The other thing is, how much do you exempt? Because at the PTA level, we have a principle that no kid should be applied to an overcrowded school. We're creating a potential. And then we get into the localization money. This fine person right here would love for all the money to go into our school district. It's very hard to expand just a single school. So Dan will say, depends on the floor space, depends on the land ratio to number of kids. And it depends on the state, what they're willing to match and how to best use money. And, when we start creating individual pots for these, it's going to be massively complicated. And I will tell you one other thing, being on the Housing Affordability Committee, you got the whole equity argument too. If you start selling neighborhood schools with allowable overcrowding, there will be some great deep concerns about the equity of moving money from one to another, even if it's an adjacent school. And if you're in the Cornwall County, there's only one adjacent school. If you're in Columbia, you have 11. Right. These are all things to consider. I would recommend everyone work backwards. What is the cost of a school in our county trended? And then work into what the school surcharge fee should be, and then what the mitigation would be appropriate to do.
Okay.
My turn. Let's do that. A new high school now costs about $300 million. 1,500 kids, right? 278, wasn't that the latest? 1,800 kids.
It's about 125 to 140 million.
Yeah,
For a new high school,
yeah, that's what
Guilford
Guilford Park
Park.
was.
for example.
Guilford Park
Now,
is
that's the
140
school
million.
itself. If you're, it's more when you start to add in land and that kind of stuff. but-
Infrastructure.
Well, you say you have to, but if you start talking about, say, a replacement, you don't have that land cost at all.
Oh,
Because you're
it's
gonna
a pure
replace on-
replacement.
Yeah,
But then it's already there, so those seats are already there. So I mean, I
not
get it.
necessarily, because if that's one of the factors that goes into doing that project is if you have to add capacity to that school and the adjacent schools, and it's more efficient to do a replacement, you don't necessarily have the seats there. You're adding the seats, but you're not necessarily a brand new school in a new location, which is
So-
an option, but
So, I mean, let's make the numbers really, really easy. Let's say it's 150 million for all of that. And then let's say it's 1,500 kids. That's $100,000 per child, per student for that school. So Brent, I'm trying to understand, let me finish. I'm trying to understand, are you saying that that project should be paying $100,000 per student into the schools? And if so, given that the residents in that community are only gonna be there for at most 12 years, should, now that they've paid for 100% of a school that's gonna be financed over 20 years and it's gonna exist for 30 or 40 years, should they then get a refund because they paid for a whole school, but they're only using it for 12 and then it's 36 useful years? Where are we going with this?
That's an interesting argument. When you build an additional house, you are creating a student yield. It's in perpetuity. The one-time expense for that impact is what the school surcharge fee is. The reoccurring expenses for supporting them, doing the operating and replacing the school and continuing to support it indefinitely ad nauseum is up to the taxpayers, and the tax, which you should know from the Spending Affordability Committee, is your income tax and your property tax base that we have here. What we're really saying is the cost of adding all these additional schools at this rate, as we bring additional households on, are we going to take the one-time cost and add it to the burden of existing homeowners that have continual replacement costs, operating costs, and other costs related to the schools. Let's pile on the one-time costs of expanding the school system.
So in my numbers,
To your numbers, the last run was roughly about 60,000 per kid that was in perpetual. Most housing units, just do basic math, 100,000 houses here, 57,000, 54,000 kids. Usually works out to something like 0.48 kids per new house built in Howard County. That's the multiplier that you add to that. So if you said 100,000, it would be 48,000, and that's on average. And that's assuming your typical house in Howard County, you've got a mix of small and large. You're going to have some in large, since we're doing it per square foot, they're paying disproportionately more for adding kids to the school system. And you're going to have on the smaller studio apartment size, probably them paying disproportionately less than impact that they're doing. But that's the progressive nature of the current school surcharge. It doesn't be.
Okay, so, looking at some of the numbers, so right now it's just barely over 1% of the inventory that gets sold in Howard County is new construction. So you're asking this barely over 1% of the inventory that gets sold in Howard County to solve all the problems. And I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. That's never going to solve all the problems. We also found that almost 98% of all of the inventory that gets sold is resale. And in our area, 90% of all the inventory was built before 2000. So most of the houses that sell are resale older houses, and they don't factor into this at all whatsoever. So I have a problem with asking these people who come in to solve all the problems through this mechanism. And we're already saying that the houses that are going to be built are mostly not going to be single family homes. They are going to be smaller homes that don't add a lot of children to the mix. So one of the things I had said to Todd a while back, I was like, if you want to make this fair, then me as a real estate agent, when I list a house, I have to say to that person, you know, you're 65 years old and you don't have any kids, but you're going to sell this house to somebody who's 35 and they have 2 kids. You know what? You have to pay a school impact fee because you're coming into the community, you're bringing kids with you in a place where there weren't kids. Well, I'll tell you what, that's a fair housing violation. A lot of these things that we're discussing, they are fair housing violations. You cannot ask familial status. You cannot ask income. You cannot ask any of those things. So from a real estate agent's perspective, some of this really just, I find amazingly inappropriate. So I will tell you also, the average person stays in their house for 11 years and the average person only moves 7 miles from where they currently live. So I think that we need to think outside of just what are we going to charge all the people who want to buy a new house? Because I think there's, I mean, I know that's what we're doing, appropriate facilities. I understand that, but I think that to think that this is going to be a be all end all solve all the problems, none of the numbers.
Yeah, good points by all of you. I think it's an interesting conversation. It's a conversation that we're having about what the school surcharge is, which has already been established. What we're talking about here is what factor we apply to that school surcharge for schools that fall into any of these tiers. So one thing I'm noticing, and I have a motion that I'm going to, is what we've just agreed to is that for tier 1, to define tier 1, it's the same utilization that Montgomery County currently has, which is 105. So we've agreed that our tier 1 is also going to be 105, but our tier 2 and our tier 3 are going to use a different utilization rate, a lower utilization rate that's currently used in Montgomery County. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to take this model and apply it to Howard County by like keeping these same payment factors that apply to Montgomery County's utilization rates that are different than those we just agreed to. But what is similar is the tier 1 and tier 1 only, we're defining 105, Montgomery County defines 105. So my motion is that we define the payment factor for tier one at elementary school at 16 2/3%, the tier one payment factor for middle school at 10%, the tier one payment factor for high school at 13 1/3%. And that's the motion. I am not proposing at this point what we should charge for tier two and tier three. I think you could do maybe some equivalency math to figure out what a reasonable percentage would be for those. But for tier one, I think I'm proposing that we start with what's on the board, those 16 2/3, 10%, and 13 1/3.
So Lisa, cut you off then for a minute.
Oh,
Now we have a
I
motion.
retract, I'm fine.
Is there a second?
Can we restate the motion?
The motion is, well, you want, yes, you're the
I
chair.
will. Yes, I will. The motion to restate is that the tier one utilization premium payment for elementary schools, 16 2/3%. Tier one UPP for middle schools is 10%. Tier one UPP for high schools, 16 1/3%.
13.
I'm sorry, 13 1/3%.
We're just doing tier one.
We're just doing tier one.
8 to 11%.
That's per grade.
And I'll second just for the
You can
purpose of
start it that way.
voting.
Any discussion, any additional discussion?
I'm just, I know when you and I, when we talked to Montgomery County, they didn't say where the numbers came from, so I'm just trying to think of like, do we want to use their numbers? Because we don't know where their numbers came from. And they could.
Have to start somewhere. I mean, I think it's more important to define this, and then we can figure out how much more tier two should be compared to tier one, and how much more tier three could be. But we have a starting point for at least what we think tier one should be. And there is an equivalency because they're both based on the same utilization rate adequacy standard of 100, being greater or equal to 105%.
Is recommended before you make these decisions. You calculate the current and trending cost per seat per student in Howard County. So this is the other end of this denominator here. That way you know also, based on the current school surcharge fee, whether you like it or not, or whether it's appropriate or not, get an idea what will come out of that. Calculate it with a accurate school surcharge fee based on current numbers, and then see what the final result is with these different payment premiums. Otherwise, you're doing magic word arbitrary. If you're literally discussing what Montgomery County did, arbitrarily assigning values to these things. Don't know if they're meeting the core mission to provide adequate capacity for kids coming into the system.
What was that last number again? It was 10%, 13.
16 2/3.
16.
16 2/3 for elementary, 10% for middle, and 13 1/3 for high school.
It's 3 1/3% per grade level.
It's not. It's 4.17 for high school, it's 3.3 for middle school, and 2.78 for elementary.
The numbers up there. It's-
I'm doing it per grade.
Yeah, there's 3 grades in middle school, 4 grades in high school, and 5 grades in elementary. So the
So you're not
percentage-
counting kindergarten or any of that?
No.
Oh.
Really?
I mean, well, then we should change the numbers.
Well, no, I agree with you. Kindergarten part of elementary school.
It's mandatory, isn't it?
Yes,
So you need capacity.
yes, it is a sixth grade. So
It is.
we
It's a
can
13th grade.
We have a motion, we're talking over each other on discussion here. Is there any discussion from the floor?
It's not-
The motion stands, right?
What do you got to say?
Did Jen second? Did you second?
Yes, yeah.
Jen seconded. Call for the vote.
All right, Mr. Arterburn?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Casagrande?
No.
Mr. Crossley is not here. Mr. Demu?
Yes.
Mr. Essen?
Yes.
Mr. Gladkoff?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
I'm actually gonna abstain.
Okay. Mr. Lovelace?
considering arbitrary, no.
Ms. Mallow? I'm sorry. Mr. Lubley?
No.
Ms. Mallow?
No.
Ms. Markovitz?
Yes.
Ms. Pantano?
No.
Mr. Scherer?
No.
Mr. Wright?
No.
And the motion fails, 6-7. So, for the noes, for the dissenting summary, what was the rationale behind it?
The arbitrariness of the numbers, is
Arbitrary,
that a word?
not based on anything.
Yeah.
Arbitrariness.
I mean, I don't teach English. We don't need to put a reason in it, didn't have, things happen.
I'm sorry, oh my gosh, yeah, sorry, my bad. I don't, never mind.
That's fine.
Okay, sorry.
So,
It's 8:30, it's late. I apologize.
but we're gonna come back to this. It's 3 weeks. A lot more time to investigate, and we'll come back to it. And we have to.
Well, and I think we're done with what we can get from Montgomery County.
That's
It's just that they're just.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with that too. We kind of took the model, moved away from it to our own numbers.
Yeah.
And now we have to figure out those percentages and the surcharge. Those are the two biggest things, because that's what's gonna say what the money is. Yes, Lisa, one last thought.
How do people feel about meeting more than once a month? I'm kind of surprised that when we did our schedule going forward, that we're only meeting once a month. I don't know why we aren't keeping our schedule of meeting twice a month. I understand that summer people might be away, but if we have a quorum, we have a quorum, we can have a meeting. So I'm just throwing that out there. And then real quick, I just want to say that I think we've done great work on this. I think that we're giving them a whole lot to think about with a new system. I don't think we have to actually decide every little thing about this possible new system. The council, if they want to do this new system, they're going to get all kinds of information from all their own sources and hash it all out like crazy. I don't think we should not talk about many of the things we want to talk about to get this every little detail. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn,
Second. First and.
first, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.